Welcome to the Stepping Stone series. I'm Caroline Stevens, and today I'm interviewing Brian Gerrish live from Skype in Devon. Today we're going to talk about the UK, current affairs, what's happening in the UK. Brian, over to you.
Okay, thanks very much, Caroline. Well, what I'll say is it's 2018 and going back a very long time for me, so I've got to say at least 12 years. One of my early talks was called State of the Nation. And what I did is I just gently went through institutions in this country, talking about them and pointing out to people that there were things going wrong. It didn't matter where you looked. You could be talking about education or the NHS or the military or government or local authorities. Everywhere you looked, there seemed to be an increasing chaos and a sense of breakdown, people getting stressed, and some people recognizing it, some people not. But when people did recognize it, they would almost be saying, I don't know what's going on, but there's something going on. Now we're 10 years or so later, and I think that view of this country, this nation is very much stronger, and many more people are now saying there's something wrong, there's something going wrong in this country. And I totally agree with that view. My personal belief is this country is being attacked from the inside, and the intent is to absolutely destroy all of our major institutions as a way of breaking down the identity of this country.
Brian, can I interrupt you there? Because, I was a Brexiteer, still am a Brexiteer, because we haven't got Brexit yet, and whether we're ever going to get it, certainly not with this government, so we can rest assured of that. But certainly the intent was when we joined the European community way back on the 1st of January 1973, the people were misled, perhaps, insofar as the idea was we were going to be broken down, we were no longer going to be a nation state, and we were going to be a region of the European Union. Do you think the breakdown was before we actually joined on the 1st of January, or do you think it's sort of accelerated since we joined?
Well, that's a really good question. I believe that the seeds for this go back much longer than our initial entry into the EU back into the early 1970s. I think the seeds of this go back to the end of the Second World War. That was when meetings took place. The most famous of them, which is quite well documented, is the Red House meeting, where the remnants of the Nazi regime were planning as to how that regime would survive after they had lost the war. And the interesting thing about that meeting was that you had very powerful business and banking interests who were meeting to discuss how the regime would survive. And that gives us a flavour as we move forward, because, of course, we still see that it's the very powerful banks, international banks, that are controlling things together with increasingly big global companies. So, yes, I agree that the drive for the European Union has been a big part of that. But if we look back to what was actually going on at the end of the Second World War, I think the seeds were set then.
Well, I know that we're still conducting these various trade deals behind closed doors. We're talking about giving away all our military, having military unification with Brussels. And the civil servants are busy working behind those closed doors, producing exit reports, and people are taking advice from Remain contacts. What evidence do you think there is of us actually getting any sort of Brexit at all?
Well, I think we're in a gigantic smokescreen at the moment. Of course, we've set up a whole department for Brexit. Apparently, let's step back a bit. We were always told that we were in the European Union to work alongside other countries. It was principally about trade. It was not about subsuming us into a new legal system or a new constitutional system. We were always reassured that, however concerned some people were, not to worry because it was really just a partnership between nation states. And how interesting that now we've had the referendum and 17.4 million people have said they want to come out of that European Union. Now suddenly it's so complex to come out because the EU is in every single facet of our society. It's in trade, it's in security, it's in the military, it's in police, it's in the policies that local authorities use. Suddenly it's so complex. We need a Brexit department, and we need a discussion and dialogue that's going to go on for years. And even though we've had Theresa May saying, well, actually, yes, we're coming out, everything that she's done is to say how most things are going to continue as normal. We're going to stay in security arrangements. We're going to stay in trading arrangements. We're going to allow the free passage of people across the European Union. So the talk is Brexit. But again, if you follow what people do, what they are doing, everything is about continuing exactly the same relationship with the European Union.
And the trouble is, the Brexiteers sometimes go down a rabbit hole with the immigration side, because this would be our perfect time to actually do a stock take, if you like, of whether we need more and more people to move into this country. Because our roads are a mess, our infrastructure, basic infrastructure now, with hospitals, the police depletions, cost cutting, austerity in councils. It's like more and more people coming in, but why do we need so many more people when we've got artificial intelligence on the cards? There's going to be huge swathes of the population which won't be able to get a job in years to come. So why do we need lots more people?
Well, my answer is that we don't need lots more people, because this is the policy which is designed to do things which most people are not aware of. Before I explain what I think that is, let's just talk a little bit about immigration, because this is a very passionate subject for a lot of people. In all of its history, this country has always had a certain amount of immigration. We've had, we'll just be a bit naughty, we've had visits from the Romans in the early times. We've had people fighting their way ashore, which we could call a form of immigration. We've had movement of populations quite close to us. A lot of Irish people came across into mainland England to live, and life has carried on. What has been different in more recent times is that we've had suddenly a government-instilled policy to bring people into this country. We're always told that the people have to come in because we need them to fulfill jobs. And that's a very interesting statement. Or else we're told that we have to accept people from overseas because they're fleeing from war zones. But my first point is that the people coming into this country are not fighting their way ashore. They're being invited into the country. And then, as I said at one meeting many years ago in the Midlands, if they didn't fight their way ashore, how are these people coming into the country? And a gentleman said to me, well, we let them in. And I said, you let them in. And he gave me a very interesting reply. But he said he didn't let them in. And eventually the audience said to me, well, our politicians let them in. And this is the truth of the matter, that the people coming into this country have come in because our politicians have made a decision that we need not just immigration, but we need substantial levels of immigration, supposedly to fill jobs, even though we've still got significant levels of unemployment in the country anyway. And
well, you've got a situation, haven't you, Brian? Sorry to interrupt, but we've got a situation where the employers, given half the chance, if they can bring somebody in to undercut the price they would actually have to pay to train somebody up in this country, it's a far easier option in many cases is to bring them in and then let the state provide the NHS, the education, and so on and so on.
But this is absolutely true, and I'll give a classic example of that very close to where I live, which is Plymouth. Is that at one stage the local hospital, Derriford Hospital, decided that because it said it couldn't recruit enough nurses, British nurses, that it was going to recruit Filipino nurses, which it duly did, even though people pointed out what this was doing was damaging the health provision in the Philippines, because it was taking trained and experienced people. Those Filipino nurses did indeed come to Derriford Hospital. They were very good. They were very well respected. But of course, after they'd worked out their contracts with the NHS, they were bright enough to realise they could earn more money in the private sector. And then they left the hospital, and the hospital was back it was in a worse situation than, excuse me, when it started. Now, we are seeing this happen time and time again. Apparently, we cannot train our own children to go through skills training, through apprenticeships, to fulfill key jobs. We used to be able to do that. Suddenly, no. We as a nation are not capable of training our own children, and we have to beg and borrow people from overseas. But I also want to get in very early that over the last 10 years in particular, I've done a lot of travelling around this country, and I have met a lot of different communities, including immigrant communities. And what I have found absolutely fascinating, and I'm going to use the word wonderful, is that when you talk to people in established immigrant communities in this country, they will tell you they're also worried about the scale of immigration, because it's now beginning to affect them, and well, it's beginning to affect their children and their grandchildren. So where we've got established Indians or Pakistanis, for example, they are very aware that the level of immigration that the government has pushed on us is now causing problems for their families. So this is not a question of a problem that's affecting white people in this country. It's something that's affecting people who of a variety of races who've been established here for some time, and the policy is accelerating. Even though the government has talked about capping the number of people coming to this country, and that was part of Brexit, we can now see Theresa May and her team backtracking on this. We're going to allow people to come in to work in the NHS. We're going to allow people to come in to do this. Why are they doing this? I think it's very simple, because the objective within Europe is not to have a Europe of nation states. It's to have a supranational state. And to achieve that, you've got to break down nation states. How do you break the values and traditions of those nation states down? You have to have a large influx of people from outside the borders, and then those new people who bring a variety of new customs and traditions of values, they start to break down the established national identity. This is an immensely cruel policy, because the people who move, many of them have moved, yes, because of wars, because they haven't got jobs. They're not coming to this country or other Western European countries for their benefit. They are actually being cruelly used as a political instrument. And if people want to check up on where there's some evidence for this, have a look at what a gentleman called Peter Sutherland said. He died not very long ago, a few months ago. But when he was alive, he was boasting publicly that we needed more migration of people in Europe in order to break down the homogeny of nation states. And this, of course, is Bilderberg policy, and it's been the policy of the people who've been working to set up the supranational European Union. So the migration of people is nothing about being kind to anybody, whatever their colour. The migration of people is designed to pressurise and break down nation states.
Brian, can I interrupt you there? Marrakesh Declaration. This has been circulating around Facebook for a few days now, and I've actually put a post about it myself. I did notice you covered it in one of your recent shows. What have you uncovered about the Marrakesh Declaration?
Well, I'm going to be very careful here because it was Mike Robinson that covered this one. But if I remember what Mike said to me was that really there was nothing new here. So this was presented as a sort of new declaration, but it wasn't actually changing anything that had been happening anywhere, anyway. And this is often the state that we will see talk about some new initiative or some new declaration as if there's going to be a change to what's going on, but watch the activity on the ground, as it were, and nothing changes. So I'm being a little bit cautious on this one because I personally didn't cover that report on the Marrakesh declaration. What I see is no change. We are still desperate to bring more people into this country, supposedly to fill job vacancies that we can't train our own people for, because people have got specialist skills. This is particularly true with the NHS. I think in neurosurgery now, over 50% of the specialists originate from outside UK. And the government is constantly telling us, well, your children are not good enough. They haven't got the qualifications or the skills to fill the jobs that we need. It's a deliberate policy.
I think the Marrakesh Declaration involved Africa, didn't it, as well? Moving people up from Africa, coming into the EU, effectively. And 27 of the EU countries have signed this declaration. I think Hungary was the only country that withheld support for it.
That is correct, from my knowledge. Probably quite a simple explanation on this is that it is well known that the European Union policy for the creation of the supranational EU state was to include Africa, certainly Northern Africa. And some years ago, I'm going to say 5 or 6, I know that there was a report within UKIP that members of UKIP in Brussels had gone into a conference room for a meeting and discovered there were still displays from a previous meeting that had been in there. And to their astonishment, they were seeing displays which was talking about how Northern African states were to be absorbed into the greater European Union. And they were also looking at material talking about how Africa was to be divided into a regional system instead of nation states. Now, this made complete sense to me at the time, because if you look at the agenda for, we'll call it the rules-based international order, some people want to call it the New World Order, but if you look at the plans for that, the world is to be divided into 3 major regions: the Americas, which is Canada, the United States and South America, forming one big power bloc, Europe, which is the European Union, Africa and Russia as one big power bloc, and then the Far East. And the Trilateral Commission, which people can look up on the internet, excuse me, this was the key part of their trilateral plan for the world, that the world was be put in these power blocks. So while we might think it incredible to believe that somebody is planning to bring Africa to integrate Africa into the European superstate model, that has always been the plan.
Wow. So with the EU unification, we're talking about 25 of the EU countries have actually signed up to PESCO, the Permanent Structured Cooperation, which is a misnomer because it's actually integration. Where is the current state of play with Britain on this? Because I know they'd signed up to most of the agreements, bar one, and they attended all the meetings. So how are we doing on that score, Brian? Do you know?
Well, we are in a very, what's the right word? we're in a very dangerous situation at the moment. The nation is being told we're coming out of the European Union, but the key indicator that we're not is the fact that ever since the announcement of Brexit was made, every step that this government has made in a military sense has been to integrate UK's military in a unified European Union military structure. Every agreement that has been signed has been moving towards this. We've had on the TV over the last couple of days the fact that there's joint UK-French exercises going on in in Eastern Europe, and we see more and more closer integration between UK armed forces, certainly the French, but also with other European units. And we've also recently had the declaration that Europe is to allow a free movement of military throughout its borders. So previously, if, for example, there was going to be an exercise somewhere within the European Union, then a whole load of protocols would have to be put in place for the military to get clearance to transit through one country and another to get to where the exercise was taking place. Now we're suddenly getting rid of that need, and European military can move freely throughout of the whole European Union. And of course, why would you want to do this? Well, you want to do this if you're actually creating one unified military structure. And
so can they move on to our territory? The fact that we're planning to leave, inverted commas.
This is the subtlety, because we could say quite easily, well, it appears to be a one-way system because they're opening the doors between the countries who are still involved in the European Union. We're sort of sat on the side, but let's remind people that the French army has been active in UK now for a number of years, with quite a considerable presence down in Cornwall at the old airfield at RAF St Morgan, which was used as a joint UK-French headquarters when there was a memorandum of understanding signed that British and French army were going to be working much closer than ever before. And that was then sealed, that deal was sealed by a huge joint UK-French army exercise on Salisbury Plain. And that presence of those French army units has continued. So whilst the government doesn't want to talk about this, the fact is that, yes, we have European armed forces on our soil.
Wasn't something to do with the Sandhurst Treaty in January that we seem to be moving closer to France?
Well, Sandhurst is a very interesting place because if you go and look at the degree of integration, previously, when did I go to Dartmouth? I went to Dartmouth in 1972. Even at that stage, Dartmouth as the Academy for Training Royal Navy Officers had other nationalities there. In fact, when I first went there, we had Iranians. They were then shifted out when the coup took place, or the Ayatollah moved into place. But Iranians were being trained, and from time to time, other nationalities would come in. And this was done, I believe, as quite a sensible way to at least say, well, we're not going to go to war with everybody because we are trying to work together and exchange ideas, etc. NATO helped that because people could work within NATO exercises, and we would have different nations working together. What is now happening in Sandhurst is that we're fully integrating. So we're having a French, I'll call him a general, who is actually heading up UK troops. We are actually producing the whole of the defence policy in agreement with the French. We're having senior British military officers meet their French counterparts in secret. One example I'm coming to is this series of meetings which took place at the British ambassador's residence in Paris. This was facilitated by the Franco-British Council. And I think they knew they were up to something dirty because they didn't wear uniforms, they wore lounge suits. But we had senior British military officers, certainly naval officers, meeting with their French counterparts for not just military discussions, but political military discussions. So this is the danger of it. We've moved away from simply having military exercises with different nations, the Germans, the Dutch, the Italians, the French, the British, coming together in their national units. Now we are bringing in foreign nationals to command British troops. And this has not stopped as a result of Brexit. It's actually accelerating.
So we haven't come to the point where they're all going to wear the same uniform as yet.
That's a very interesting one. I smile because I think that's coming quite quickly. If you look, for example, at the Navy, I pay attention to the Navy. We've gone from the Navy having some pretty respectable, smart uniforms to seeing people dressed in very scruffy looking uniforms with baseball caps. And that baseball cap uniform is now spreading across Europe. So I am seeing a lot of similarity in dress.
And now they've got, was it 50 projects on the go for the EU military?
Well, it's the big thing is it's encompassing everything. So it's encompassing research and development and procurement of military equipment. So whereas going back in my day, Britain was still producing the bulk of its own military equipment, whether that was ships or tanks or aircraft. Now we can't do that. We can't build an aircraft unless we have help from the French or the Germans or the Italians. And we should be looking at Brexit, which means that we're starting to re-establish proper industry in Britain. That is absolutely not happening because while Theresa May is lying to the nation about Brexit, what is happening is she's signing more deals to say that Britain will continue to cooperate and be integrated into these European procurement programs.
Well, we've saw the signing, didn't we, after the referendum of the Canadian super deal. They renamed it, didn't it, because it was actually called the Comprehensive Economic Trade Agreement. But people remembered that was similar to TTIP. So now David Davis and his colleagues call it the Canadian super deal. But it's exactly the same. It gives the power to the corporations. So what is our government playing at?
Well, this is where we say, what is our government? And I no longer believe that our government is a group of good people who we elect and they look after our interests. I believe that what we have is a puppet show of parties and people who are put in place as candidates and then become elected. Who do they work for? They don't work for us at all because they are utterly controlled by the people who fund the parties, big banks and big global corporate interests. So I personally have come to the conclusion that our government now is indeed a banking and corporate government. And therefore, when we see that these massive international trade deals being put forward with all the rules, this makes sense because those deals are not for us as individual members of this nation. They are for profit making for these vast global concerns.
I mean, it seems so strange, doesn't it, on Facebook? Certainly, you see the evidence of people from the Red Party versus the Blue Party, and they'll argue and argue about which is going to produce the best government. But yet, all these political parties are actually run by the establishment. They all have ultimately the same aims and objectives. So why all these arguments? Why this division? I mean, I don't know if you know, Brian, but I'm now the campaigns officer for a group called Democracy 17-4. And we now need to return to getting good men and women back into Parliament, clearing this entire establishment out. And we just need people to be confident in clearing these people out of Parliament. I mean, nobody could be worse than what we've got at the minute, surely.
Well, this is absolutely true. It's a puppet show. It's theatre. While people are preoccupied with will Labour do better than the Conservatives, they're not really paying attention to what's happening, or to a large extent. Who controls the Conservative Party? The people who put the money in. And let's look at it over the last month or so. We've had the bizarre situation where Theresa May is standing up on a stage berating those nasty Russian criminals who are in London. And then she's taking 3.4 million from Russian individuals and business people, who many people are saying, well, actually, Theresa, some of those are the criminals you're talking about. So the Tory party is just a front for whoever's putting the money in. And we probably save it for another chat. But of course, what we know is that MPs are being blackmailed to do the bidding of people behind the scenes. So the whole of the political system is a lie. It's a farce. The party controlled. The way they select candidates is highly controlled. The way the candidates are then allowed to move through the political system is highly controlled. And I'll mention something which I'm beginning to feel very passionate about. We've now also, on top of the money interests and the corporate interests, got the situation where we've got a foreign nation, Israel, boasting of its ability to influence British politicians via Friends of Israel. Whether it's Conservative Friends of Israel or Labour Friends of Israel, we have a foreign nation. Never mind whether we consider Israel good or bad. It's not the UK, but it is a nation that is boasting it can control and influence the policies that our politicians put forward because it can lobby, because it's got money for wining and dining. And we then end up with a situation where we can have a Prime Minister, David Cameron, saying publicly that his loyalty to Israel is unshakable. Well, this is remarkable because the UK column asked the simple question: if David Cameron's loyalty to Israel is unshakable, what he's actually saying is that the people of Britain come second. You can't have two masters.
No.
So there he was, as a politician, calmly stating that the first priority, his first priority, was Israel. We've had Michael Gove, who we've bizarrely allowed to be involved in education and teaching our children, boasting on a public stage that he's a Zionist. And I asked the same question: where does your priority lie, Mr. Gove? Is it for Israel or is it for this country? And these are questions which a lot of people don't like to ask because they can get very emotive. But I think it's a very easy one. Imagine if we had Italy boasting that it had so many British MPs who were pro-Italy that it could influence British policy. There'd be an outcry. But we have it with Israel. And if you dare mention the subject, the usual accusation is that you're anti-Semitic. Well, this is not being about anti-Semitic. It's simply saying, how can a foreign nation be allowed to influence our policies to this extent?
Well, I think this is the time now. I think more and more people are hopefully waking up to the fact that we have this pantomime. We have so many lies being told. We have no debating in Parliament. You know, what are we going to do? The people are crying out for the truth, but yet there are still people that are still sleepwalking.
There are. Let's get something positive into this, and I think we can afford to be positive. From what we see, a lot of information comes into the UK column, a lot of information. We talk to a lot of people on a daily basis. We we do our talks, we travel around the country, we are seeing more and more people waking up. What is quite common is a lot of people say, there's something going wrong in this country. I don't know what it is. The schools are in turmoil. The transport system doesn't work. The roads are full of potholes. The NHS is falling apart. The military can't put a ship to sea. Every direction you go in, people are picking up. There's this sense of breakdown.
Well, of course,
But
you've got in the judicial system, you've got a clamp down on legal aid, so people have less protection than they've ever had before. And you've got the secret courts, haven't you, where children are removed from their families.
Right. You've also got the police who are caught in a sort of vice, because on one hand, they're having all of their budgets cut, so they can't police properly. Their numbers are cut, their training is cut, they can't police properly to stop crime. But on the other hand, the government is giving them money and pushing them to become increasingly paramilitary. So we have black suited police with balaclavas and automatic weapons who are presented as British police. This is something foreign coming in here. Now, people are seeing this stuff happening, but very often they don't connect it together. They might, let's say you have somebody who works as a school teacher. Inside the school, they can see educational policy, which is constant change. It's stressful. When they think they've got their routines sorted out one way, it changes again. This is happening in the NHS. Every time that people in a hospital feel they've got organised and the management structure is working, there's this change. And the change produces stress, chaos and turmoil. This is happening everywhere. Where people are being affected by this, they're starting to ask questions. They're at work, their work is getting very stressful, they're looking around for answers. And we see the number of people now who are searching for those answers is dramatically increased on what it used to be. What answers do we give them? Well, we have to be, I believe, brutally honest about what we see, because we're not seeing a few problems in the NHS. If I take that as an example, what we're seeing in the NHS is orchestrated breakdown. We are seeing management systems complicated and pressurized that people can't work properly. We're seeing anybody who dares question what's happening or becomes a whistleblower, they are viciously attacked. This is coming into the newspaper at this very moment with all of the story about the gospel hospital deaths. So a very brutal, aggressive structure inside the NHS. That is occurring inside schools, it's occurring inside the military, it's occurring inside the local authorities.
And then we've had situations like the Grenfell Towers, where they've collected lots and lots of money. And what's happening? Has the government lost control there?
I agree. Just park that one to the side for a moment, because if we can see a template policy which is causing chaos, stress, angst and breakdown occurring in all these different institutions, local authorities, schools, hospitals, the police, even the government itself, that policy is coming from somewhere. Now, about 2 years ago, two Conservatives let the cat out of the bag. They were a gentleman called Danny Kruger, who was a Conservative Party parliamentary candidate, and a Conservative MP called Nick Bowles. And it was uncanny because they said it at different events, but they did make these statements publicly. They both said that the Conservative government intended to introduce a period of creative destruction in the public services. And the reason that was going to happen was because the government believed that in order to get their new political agenda in place, they had to break down and destroy the old institutions. Now, those are not my words. People can go out there, certainly look for those comments in The Guardian, because I know The Guardian was one of the key newspapers. But Tory politicians let slip that the government itself was to attack our institutions. Now we're into very, very dark stuff, because in my mind, as an ex-military man, we are talking about subversion by our own government. We are being attacked by our own government. And let's come back to this fact that if we naively assume that our government is comprised of good elected MPs, why would those MPs want to do that? However, if our MPs are simply chosen and selected people, and they're chosen and selected by big banking and corporate interests, it's very easy to see, for example, why they'd want to break the NHS down, because the objective is to privatise it and make even more profit out of sickness and getting rid of people who are not profitable.
Well, of course, Brian, so many of the MPs, if you look at their backgrounds, they also have second incomes, or really actually a primary income, from the City of London or from Big Pharma or
Absolutely.
from green energy. So they've got an immediate conflict of interest. They shouldn't be there.
They shouldn't be there. You're absolutely right. Now, Grenfell Tower, what is that? It's symptomatic, at a simple level, it's symptomatic of this picture that we're building, because Grenfell Tower happened to be in a location that was worth a lot of money as far as real estate went. And I am correct in saying that it has been publicly reported that some time ago there was a proposal to demolish Grenfell Tower, because whatever was built on the site of Grenfell Tower was going to be worth a fortune. Well, apparently that plan never went through. But then we have a fire. And when I personally think about what happened in that fire, I find all sorts of things which I can't explain. As a military man, I've done a full firefighting training, including breathing apparatus and entry into buildings and structures. I've done that, although I obviously was not a fireman. But when I watched what happened with that fire, it was astonishing, because when people came out of the building, you would have expected those people to have been very closely helped and assisted. What did you want out of those people? On the spot, you wanted information about whether their neighbour was still in the building, about how many people they thought were on their floor. But what happened with the people from Grenfell Tower? They were dissipated. So there was never any attempt, even at the stage that fire was burning, to find out how many people were in that building. And then we saw something very, very interesting. We saw the mainstream media, led by the BBC, starting, I'll say, to not tell the truth. So even when it was apparent that the number of deaths was going to be significant, the BBC was reporting a fire as if there was no deaths. Somebody will correct me, but I think it was about 4 days before we got to the fact that 7 people had died. And what was interesting is at that stage, the UK column was receiving information from people directly connected to the firefighting team that they'd found 51 people dead in the lower stairwell alone.
Well, I think they reported it to be something like 72, the last count.
That all came later.
But of course, it's a lot higher than that, isn't it? I mean, the fact of the matter is the workmen working on that Grenfell Towers now, they've all had to sign official secrets documents, so they can't disclose the fact that they are still finding bodies.
I have no direct documentary evidence of what you've just said, but I have also heard that this is what is happening. So we've got a national tragedy, a horrific tragedy, which had a hugely significant effect on the local community. Together with Mike Robinson and David Scott and Alex Thompson, we went up to meet some of the Grenfell community within a few days after the fire. So we have talked to people locally. My goodness, they were in a state. What do we see the UK government doing? lying,
Yep.
covering up.
Apparently, the area is covered with undercover police still.
Well, that
So,
was
what are they
that.
trying to hide?
Well, that was one of the things that the local community said to us, that whereas they would have expected the police to be, really looking to help them, and indeed there were some very good police, there were others that they found had become quite aggressive to them, and they didn't understand this. And certainly in the days after the fire, there was this cauldron around the building itself, and people said it's quite scary if you go near it. So this is what our country has become. I mean, walk through a city, we're tracked by CCTV cameras. We have notices warning us that if we drop a lollipop stick, we're going to be fined £60. We are seeing this country creeping. It's done in a creeping salami slicing way. It is being turned into a dictatorship. It's obvious. You've mentioned the court system, secret courts for families, but also other people going through secret courts. No juries, no press, just people appearing in a staff chamber in front of a judge. We've got a lady called Melanie Shaw, child abuse victim. She's been through the psychiatric system. Okay. I've got another lady who's presently in the psychiatric system. Why is she there? To shut her up. This was what we were told was going on in East Germany.
And of course, basically Facebook and, all social media now is they're censoring all our posts.
They are censoring it. Absolutely. So we've got a state. Let's just recap on a few things.
Yeah, let's recap.
We are
because we want to end on a positive note, don't we, Brian? I'm not quite sure what that positive note is, apart from removing our MPs and the Mayor of London.
Well, we will end on a positive note, but if we say we are seeing people are reporting breakdown in our major institutions, which follows a pattern. If it follows a pattern, it's orchestrated. There's policy driving it. We've got Conservative MPs who have openly stated the plan of the Conservative government was to create orchestrated breakdown. We had Pickles, Eric Pickles, when he was in power as Communities Minister, saying, I may look an unlikely revolutionary, but we are going to revolutionise the constitution in this country. That's a pretty interesting statement. And we've got a government boasting that it's running the Conservative Party based on the money from Russian oligarchs. So I think the visible evidence that we've got a criminal cabal running this country is pretty clear, and their policy is to completely destroy the identity of this nation so that we, sovereign beings in that nation, are completely lost. What's the good news? The good news is the speed at which people are waking up. People are now seeing for the first time that something's wrong, whereas before they were too busy watching the TV, having the beer, going on the foreign holiday. They didn't see it. Now they're starting to see something's wrong, and the speed at which they're waking up is accelerating. What needs to happen, though, is that they've got to realise that the country is being attacked on a very big scale, and therefore it needs millions of people to say, no, we're not having this. They don't need to be rioting, and certainly they don't want them to riot, because if people go to violence on the street, the state can unleash all of these armed police and the paramilitary groups. We want people to be peaceful, but amazing what big peaceful demonstrations can do when people laugh at the Prime Minister. Imagine if we had 1 million people on the streets of London laughing at the Conservative Party and Theresa May. You can make whatever policy you like, but you are idiots and criminals, and we're not following it. They'd be gone in a matter of days.
Well, thank you. So we just need to be clearing them all up then. We need to be just educating people.
We need to be educating people. We need to be exposing what's going on to show people the reality of what's going on. Robert Greene, I'm sure many people will know Robert, but if you don't know Robert Greene, he's done fantastic work campaigning against child abuse. But Robert says all we've got to do is lift the stones. And when we lift the stones, the nasty little beasties come running out from underneath and they scuttle away and hide. And this is true with politicians and the people who are carrying out criminal acts. When they know that the public is watching and can see them, they take themselves away.
Well, so, Brian, I think what will happen is, the MP's assistants will end up with such a huge workload with all the cuts that maybe they'll go on strike. And there's, we just need to be telling people all about this.
We do, and the beauty of this is that telling people is so easy because all you've got to do is talk.
Yeah.
Talk to people in the supermarket queue. Talk to people when you're queuing in the post office or you're getting your fuel. Just ask a few questions or point a few things out, and the word spreads very quickly. And the other bit I'm going to say is that the attack on this country is vicious. If we look at how bad it is, it's not only elderly people dying unnecessarily in the NHS, it's small children dying unnecessarily in the NHS, or it's children being abused. The system is absolutely vicious, but the counter to it is exposing it for what it is, and that's so easy because it's simply telling the truth, putting the evidence out there and talking about it and sticking together. It's not going to make any difference that you're white or black or Christian or Asian or Chinese. This regime is going to get you if we allow it. So
we're the 99%. I think that's the important thing now we've just got to go away with, is we are the 99% and we need to remove the 1% because they're the ones that are influencing our lives and
Absolutely.
Continue to do so unless we stand up. So united we stand, divided we fall.
Absolutely.
Brexit is a very good foundation for this because this is now it's going to be a catalyst for people realising that our government has lied, will continue to lie. It's all about big business. It's all about rollout of 5G and so on. So, yes, let the government falter over Brexit. We will press on, united. As I say, democracy is 17-4, but we want the Remainers to come on board now that they know that our government is giving away our military, giving away our NHS. It's nothing to do with Brexit. It's just about corporatism, globalisation, and just too many snouts in the trough. So on that note, Brian, thank you so much for being on Skype tonight. It's getting quite late, so I'll bid you farewell. And thank you so much to the audience for watching tonight. And I hope you can put some comments on the chat box on Facebook and we'll have a look. And Brian will probably, one of us will make some comments back. So thank you all. And thanks again, Brian, for coming and sharing your work with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good night.